Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and today we're here with part 9 of our Vogue 1650 Sew Along. Today we are doing all the finishing touches on our jacket and then I will have footage of me actually in the new coat at the very end, so make sure you stay tuned till then. I have decided to add a belt buckle to my belt on this pattern. I had one in my stash and I will leave it linked down below. It's from Tabitha Sewer. It's an acrylic belt buckle, looks kind of like a tortoiseshell, but I did decide to add that and I'll show you how I do it just for something kind of fun. So I did change up the pattern just a little bit because I had one in my stash and wanted to use it. All right guys, I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. It's been kind of a beast, but we got there in the end. I love my finished jacket. So yeah, if you have any questions, leave them down below. And if I would love to see anything that you guys are making, especially with this pattern. I used to use the hashtag TK Sew Along for you guys to post anything on Instagram that you followed along one of my sew alongs, and then it makes it fun for, I follow the hashtag so I can easily see what you guys are all making. So yeah, if you want to use that hashtag on Instagram, it really helps me see all the things that you're making from the sew alongs. I just love seeing that. All right guys, that's all I have for this week. I hope you have enjoyed this and the sew along, and I will be back next week for a tutorial before we dig into our next sew along. I hope you guys have a good Sunday, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Okay guys, let's finish up our jackets today. This is so very exciting. Okay, so I'm going to do the belt first, and then we're going to go over to the cutting table because we got to do some hand sewing on the jacket before we can top stitch and then do our buttons and buttonholes. I'm going to put a buckle on my belt. The belt does not, it's just a strip of fabric. It is piece 22. This one is one of the ones that has the extension because it's very long. You cut out 2 of these piece 22, but I just thought it would be cool I have this belt buckle from Tabitha Sewer, and I will link it down below. This is just an acrylic one. I just think it's really pretty, and I think I'm going to use the darker colored buttons that I showed you in the very first video for this jacket. And I think even though they're also kind of a horn or tortoiseshell type look, they are dark, and so it's dark on darks, and they kind of go with the dark color that's here in this. So I think the belt buckle will be kind of the star in the front of this coat. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. Obviously, you can just make the belt as is. That's how it's drafted. It looks great, but I'm going to do something just a little different. All right, first off, I had to piece my belt pieces. Oh, sorry. I just didn't have enough length of fabric. So you may have to do the same. I just put in little quarter seam allowances right there, but we're going to pretend that that is not the case. Pretend those aren't there. All right, and we've got 2 of these lengths, and we're going to be sewing them right sides together. And we're leaving a gap so that we can turn this. All is said and done. Okay. Now, I could do this differently, differently because I'm putting a belt buckle in, but I'm going to do it the way that the pattern calls, and then I'll show you how you can adapt it even for later if you decide to add a belt buckle later. Okay, let's go. I'm starting a little past halfway. Five-eighths of an inch seam allowance. Turn the corner. Now we're going to sew all the way down on this one. big, long rectangle. Okay, now I want to leave a good couple inch spot for turning. So I've got, that's where I started, that's where I'm stopping. Okay, now, oopsie, very simple. I'm just going to trim my seam allowances, trim my corners. I'm just cutting my seam allowances in half. This is a very, as with the rest of this coat, a long, unwieldy piece. Okay, I'm gonna do this off camera just because you get the idea. I'm trimming all of the seam allowances in half, and then when I get to the point where I started, which is right here, my gap, I just cut on either side of it up about halfway through, and I'm gonna leave the seam allowances in that spot. So it will look something like this. It'll look something like that. It just makes it, when you turn it, a little bit easier. Okay, I'm going to do that, turn it right side out, finish trimming my seam allowances, and then give it a good press, and then I'll meet you back here for top stitching. Okay, once you have everything turned right side out and pressed, you should have, you know, your hole for turning. That's where I like to start. Now we're gonna go around the whole shebang and top stitch at, oh, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, whatever floats your boat. Okay, once you've top stitched, now I'm gonna put my belt buckle on. At this point, you can be completely finished. That's fine. Decide which side you want to be your right side. We're just gonna arbitrarily put this to be our right side. And I'm just gonna go up. This should work without too much gathering. So, sorry. So I'm going up, back down. And that is gathering, isn't it? Dang it. I think we're just gonna go with it. Call it a feature. Okay, and then on the back, I'm just basically wrapping it around here. I'm going to top stitch right where I just sewed that line. And then I'll show you. This is easier said than done. I may go in just... I'm gonna have to go through a little bit more. There we go. Okay. I just can't get that buckle. All right, so we're going to top stitch it in place. And now, when this is on the coat, like that, this will go around your waist. So it'll go around your waist, and then you'll just go whoop and whoop. And there you go. That's how that will stay tied. Okay, so that's going to be a nice little detail. Okay, let's go over to the cutting board, and I'm going to show you how to hand sew the vent in place. Okay, so here's our coat. Got our belt all sewn. We will top stitch. At this point, go ahead and mark your buttonholes and your buttons. I've marked my buttons with my Frixion pen. I've noticed when I hit that with steam, it turns white, so it's not completely disappearing on this fabric, which is fine for the buttonhole part. But for my actual, or for the button, because the button will be covering that spot. But for the buttonholes, I just use chalk, which might be a little difficult to come off, but it will eventually come off. And I've marked my buttons on this side, and you have a button that's like way up here in the underneath the shield, because the shield will cover over the top when all is said and done. Okay, so make sure just transfer that from your pattern. Okay, we're gonna open up our coat here. All right, so here is our vent that is, as of right now, unfinished. So first we want to get things into place. So kind of everything all into place. And then this, okay, so we have the under, or the overlap, because this is the back side that's here. We're going to do the right side. See, this is the left side when worn, but right side when we're looking at it here. And we've pressed that seam allowance. And we just want to pin. And we're matching our seam line up here, center back of the lining with the center back of that vent, okay? Because we're going to have excess lining. Remember, because we've got that jump pleat. So we want it to match up here, up at the top. So I'm just going to pop in a pin. I'm going to pin this for you, and then it's just a matter of slip stitching it into place. Okay, so matching up center back. Just going to pop a pin like that, and then pull it taut. Basically, your raw edges should be matching underneath there. And so we'll have a nice little, is that in frame? A nice little jump pleat here. And we're going to sew that completely, hand stitch that all the way down. So it'll be anchored all the way to the bottom here. So we can go in and pin that down. And then we could just throw in a couple of pins, just so things don't shift on us as we're sewing. Okay, now hand stitch this first and just slip stitch right there in the fold all the way down, you know, from the top down to the hem. Then you're going to come back, and remember this area that we reinforced with our stitching where we went at the angle? You're going to fold this under. So you just have so much better control when you may have to kind of tug at things if things are falling off the table. You don't want to see that stitching though, so fold that in. And then you want to fold where you've cut, but you're going to come right off this fold. And then move that under. So you're going to stitch, hide that lining, right here at the top, right until you get off that fold. Of the underlap. And then on your way down, you'll be sewing this not to this piece, okay? You want to sew it to the, what's the overlap actually? And that little area where we clipped should come right to the top and just go past that fold. And then you can do the same thing. Fold, match up your raw seams. Can move that other one out of the way. And then we're hand stitching all the way down on this side as well, and you'll stitch that jump pleat in there as well. Okay? So again, it is just a slip stitch. My fabric has some bounce to it as well because it's got a little bit of stretch in there. Kind of going every which way with my pens. Okay, so again, we're going to sew this side down first, then you're going to sew down here right past this fold, and then kind of push this out of the way, and then sew all the way down on this side of the hem, and then our vent will be closed. So let's do that, and then I will meet you over at the sewing machine, and we are going to top stitch our coat, and then we'll do our buttons and buttonholes, and then we'll be finished. Okay. All right, it is time to start top stitching. So you've got everything all sewn in by hand. There's your vent, and we're going to start at our vent. And we're actually starting at the underlap. Now, we just got to be very careful. I mean, we don't have to start right at the top here just because you're not going to see that, just because it's the underlap. I'm only going to sew this at 1/4 of an inch. We're going all the way around the coat. We've already top stitched our sleeve. But yeah, let's top stitch around this. All right. So starting here at the vent, let me trim that off just. Okay. Just going to do 1/4 of an inch. This is the underlap. So, I mean, you don't really see this except for occasionally. But I'm making note of where I want to turn for my hem. Now, remember we've got our jump pleat that we tacked down. So even though we could go up, you know, to the seam line there of that lining, you're going to have to, you would have to sew over this point at the jump, and I don't want to do that. So what I want to do is come a little further. I think I've determined about 3 centimeters, or about, I don't know, 1.25 inches is right where I want to be. Okay, so now I'm going to turn, sewing along the hem. You want to make sure that there's nothing under there that might accidentally get pinched where you don't want it to. Also, it's at this point, you know, the area that you didn't, if you haven't slip stitched it yet, this is going to get top stitched over that, right there at the base where we couldn't get the machine. So you may find that you really don't need to. Okay, now we're to the front of the coat, and now we're going to do 1/4 of an inch. Let's go one more stitch. Oh boy, losing the coat. Okay, now we're going up the front. And this is the right front that I'm on right now. And You'll notice as I'm coming up on it, there is one buttonhole on the, not the right front, on the left front. And this is the inside button, so it's like a hidden button right at the waist. I'll leave plenty of room for that buttonhole. So that button will be like on the underneath side of the right. Like a nice clear button. Okay, now we're up here to the top of the lapel. You want to stay at that 1/4 inch seam or top stitching. Okay, so now we're going to turn the corner and we're going to sew over the lapel, and we're coming up on our collar. Get that sleeve out of the way. And we also don't want to get our shield caught in here, but we're going to come up to that collar band, pick it up, and just keep kind of right along the side there. Now we're on the collar. One more stitch. We're going to sew all the way across the top of the collar. The same thing. Now to the other lapel. And then we've got our buttonholes on this side that are the functioning, buttonholes that you'll see. And again, I want that seam pulled to this side because when it's worn open, which is how I'll wear it 90% of the time. This top stitching just makes such a difference. I mean, I like the way it looks just with the nature of the trench coat, but it also makes everything so nice and flat. It really finishes off your coat. Stay on the table. It's been the biggest challenge. All right, we're gonna go slow. We get down here to the hem. There we go. Just making sure I'm not getting any, that there's no lining like hanging down or... Okay, and then I think I want to do a similar... Okay, now we're going up the top vent, and I've got my hand under here pushing any possible lining, and my goal is that I really want to get it matched up, you can't see it yet, to the top part where I did that top stitching. So I just And I don't think, I don't want to sew, I've got the underlap pulled up out of the way, but I don't want to accidentally tack it down anywhere. I think I'm okay though. Yes, perfect. And then it matches back up right there. Okay, we have top stitched around the entire coat now. So you can go and give it one more good press. And then we're going to do our buttonholes. So I will meet you over at my other machine where I do my buttons and buttonholes, and we're so close. Okay, let's get our buttons on. I'm going to do a buttonhole for you. I've already done the other 3 main buttonholes, and then there's also a hidden buttonhole that goes in on the inside, and I'm going to show you that here in just a second once we have sewn all of these. But what I am using my regular thread in the bobbin. So my regular, I use Gutermann Mara 100, but up here on coats, for my top thread, this is like a jeans, top stitching thread weight. WAWAK has this in the same colors that you can buy the Gutermann Mara 100. This is the Gutermann Mara 30. So it's a much thicker thread. I mean, look at that. You can even see. And that's the same weight of thread that I use for my jeans top stitching. And it just makes a really nice buttonhole on coats. So I have put on a keyhole button that I want to use for my machine. I have set it to that. I have my buttonhole foot in. I've got the button. I have to put you can see the button back there. And I leave it kind of loose. I don't want it super tight, that it's hard getting the buttons in and out of the buttonhole, so I leave them just a little bit loose. Okay, I have marked my buttonhole, which you can see here. I don't really need the end point, but it helps me to keep it straight. And I'm just lining this up, and I can't do that with a tripod in my lap. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to make that keyhole button, and I'm just going to go nice and slow. I think I've said before, I don't really like the way my Janome does buttonholes. It's not the most beautiful buttonhole ever. It's fine, but I would not buy this machine for its beautiful buttonholes. All right, I'm just clipping my threads here. Okay, so there we have, oh my gosh, let me get this off the machine. All this out of the way. Okay, so I have my 4, so see that top stitching thread, my chalk is still there. See, it kind of does like a wonky on the keyhole. But that top stitching thread just looks so nice, and it matches the fabric, so that it just looks, I just really like it. So I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4 buttonholes, and this is on the right front. And then on my left front, which is where my buttons are going to go, I have a little buttonhole right here, and it's level with the 3rd button. Is that right? 1, 2, 3. No, 4th button. It's level with the 4th button, and this is going to be like a little clear button. Well, this one. That I'm going to sew on the back of the other button on the other side, just to keep everything, you know, there's so much underlap that goes underneath the coat. It just helps keep everything tucked in nicely. Now for this buttonhole, I used the Gutermann Mara 100 in both the top and the bottom. And that chalk will come off here. You can hit it with a washcloth if it doesn't want to, but so it just makes it a little less standouty. So keeps that hidden a little bit. So that's the 5th buttonhole I've made. So now I'm just going to go put fray check on the front and back right in the center of the buttonhole. And I put fray check, and then I immediately put a iron on top of it and kind of iron over it until it dries. And that keeps the fray check from getting super crunchy. And then I'm going to cut my buttonholes open, and I do that with a self-healing mat and a buttonhole chisel. But open them up however you'd like. And then I will meet you back here, and we're going to sew on our buttons. All right, so now we just have to put on our buttons. Now, I want to make a note that on the right front, where we have our buttonholes, you've got buttons that are parallel with those, and those are just decorative. Now, you could sew buttonholes. You also have stray threads. You could sew another set of buttonholes here and make them functional or not functional. It's up to you. But this pattern has them non-functional. They're just there for looks. Honestly, how many people are actually going to button all 8 buttons? Not many. I'm sure there was a function. I mean, there was a function when this was actually used for utility purposes, when a trench coat was used like in the army and that kind of thing. But on the other side, we do have the buttons that match with the buttonholes. So when this gets, you know, buttoned over, this gets buttoned. This button is kind of up underneath this shield, but when this gets buttoned, I will probably never wear this buttoned just because that's going to be way too high up, but then the shield goes over it. So just a little tip there. So we've got 8 buttons total that get sewn on. So I've got, and I did not do my buttons how I normally do because these are not in a straight line. They go out and then they slowly come in as you go down and get closer to the center front. So I used my pattern and marked my buttonholes and my buttons. So I have one left to do here. So I thought I would do that one on camera. I have marked my buttonhole right there with a friction pin. And, come on, coat. Oh, good night. Okay. A lot of coat here. And this area of my sewing room is not as open as my normal machine. Okay, so I've got regular thread in my bobbin, and I have my regular Gutermann Mara thread up there on my top needle as well. I chose a color that's similar to the color of the button because I want it to blend in, and my buttons are a dark brown. They're kind of a horn. You see a little bit of a pattern there. You could use the buttonhole thread if you wanted for your buttons. That would be a nice secure thread. I just didn't have any that was a color that I liked with these buttons, so I'm using my Gutermann Mara 100, and it should be fine. So basically, I have a button foot on my machine, and my machine, when I put it on this stitch, it lowers the feed dogs, and they just don't work at all. So if you don't have a button stitch on your machine, just try, if you can lower your feed dogs, just lower the feed dogs, and all it is an in-place zigzag stitch. So I'm just going to lower my needle. Now I want to make sure before I hit the gas here. I can make that wider if I wanted to. Okay, so there's one way. These are a 4-hole button, so I'm just going to clip that. I'm just going to clip my top threads. I'll leave the bottom threads attached. I don't care if they get kind of nesty in the back. And then I'm going to go the other way. All right, so there, that should hold it on just fine. It locks the stitch in place. I mean, you can sew these on by hand, obviously, if you'd like. But for our final button, which is our clear button, it actually gets sewn. So we've got our buttons, and I think the instructions actually said to sew it behind the 3rd button, but that's not what it matches up with. It matches up with the 4th button. So let me push this out of the way. This one we are going to have to sew by hand because we're sewing it right behind. So if you line up everything here, yeah, it lines up with the 4th button. So don't look at the instructions there. So the bottom button, my decorative button that's here across from my functioning buttonhole, on the back, I am just going to hand sew this button right behind it. So when I wear this little nondescript, I will button that into there like so, and then the other buttons can go on, you know, however high up I want to go. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm just going to sew this button right behind the 4th button on the right side by hand. And then I'm going to give everything a really, really good steam and press. And then I will see you, instead of on the mannequin this time, it's going to be actually on my body. So I will show you my twirls now. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. Next week we'll be back with a tutorial, and then we'll be back for another sew along. Bye, guys.